Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be reviewing the Sharks 16-17 season. So, of course, coming out of the 15-16 season, the Sharks headed into a 2016 offseason that was both one of the happiest and one of the saddest in franchise history. Of course, one of the happiest because of the fact that the Sharks, for the first time in franchise history, actually managed to make it to the Stanley Cup Finals. But what made it so sad, and I'm sure very bittersweet for many of the Sharks players and Sharks fans, is the fact that the Sharks were just 2 wins away from getting the ultimate goal of actually winning a Stanley Cup, and it remains the closest they have ever been in Sharks history, it can be said. And so going into the 16-17 season, hopes were pretty high for the Sharks. There were very few changes to the team besides some additions to it. David Schlemko would come in as a defenseman, replacing Roman Polak, who would depart. And so it looked like the Sharks could be competitive once again. And in the regular season, it was a bit of a repeat of the previous year. The Sharks would only put up 1 more point than they had the previous season, with a record of 46-29-7. However, offensively, it was a bit of a downturn. While last season all 3 of Thornton, Burns, and Pavelski were just lighting it up on the scoreboard. Thornton with a point per game season that year, as well as Pavelski and Burns with above 75 points. This year it would be Burns leading the way with just 76 points, though 29 goals and 47 assists would allow him to get the James Norris that season. But then it would be Pavelski who would take a bit of a step back, just 29 goals and 39 assists for 68 points. Then it would be Couture who would take a pretty significant step back. Yes, he did miss a few games, having only played 73, but still 25 goals, 27 assists for 52 points. But the biggest step back would be Joe Thornton after that 82-point season, the point per game. It looked like he was really just getting better somehow with age, and yet this was a bit of a step back. 79 games played, as he would end up missing the last few of the season due to an injury, which would really hamper his performance in the playoffs. Just 7 goals with 43 assists and 50 points. Patrick Marleau would be next, of course, all 82 games played by him, and he would actually put up a pretty solid performance. 27 goals, very impressive, 19 assists for 46 points. But then the 6th highest scoring on the Sharks didn't even crack the 30-point mark. Joel Ward there with 10 goals, 19 assists, and 29 points. Martin Jones would have a pretty solid regular season. Still 65 games started, 35 wins, with a 2.4 GAA, which is maybe slightly above average, and a .912 save percentage, which is more so in line with the average. And as such, the Sharks would head into the first round and face off against the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers were making their, triumphant return to the playoff scene. The Oilers had missed the playoffs for many, many years in a row. After they had drafted McDavid in 2015, it looked like it would turn around, but McDavid would get injured in the 15-16 season halfway through, and so the Oilers would end up with yet another high overall pick, but they would finally get back to the playoffs. They'd face off against the Sharks, and many people were favoring the Sharks, even though the Oilers were higher in the standings, because of course the Sharks had all that experience, and the Oilers, well, didn't have very much of it, even though they did have McDavid and Draisaitl leading the way. And in that first game, it looked like that's the way it was going to go. The first game, Sharks were dominant, though it was only an overtime victory with a Melker Karlsson overtime goal. Still, a 1-0 series lead. It looked like the Sharks could be making another run for it, but with games 2 and 3, that completely turned around. They were shut out 2-0 in game 2, and then in the first game at home for the Sharks, they were shut out 1-0. Just an embarrassing loss, especially when you take into consideration the previous one, which was yet another shutout. And so just the offense that had taken a downturn in the regular season was just non-existent here in the playoffs. Game 4 was just this outlier here with a 7-0 victory, them turning the tables and shutting out the Oilers this time, and it would become a best-of-3 series. But in games 5 and 6, just not really good performances by the Sharks. While it was a close one in game 5 on the scoreboard, 4-3 overtime loss, the Sharks weren't necessarily massive factors in that game, and it was the Oilers who seemingly were on the brink of winning that game for constantly, especially in the overtime. The Oilers were just completely dominant. And then in game 6, still just no goal support from the offense. It was a 3-1 loss, and the Sharks would bow out in the first round, surprisingly, after that Stanley Cup Finals finish in the previous season. In terms of playoff performances, it would be Patrick Marleau leading the way, and it should be pointed out that a lot of these points were accrued during that 4th game in which it was a 7-0 victory, so they're not necessarily the most meaningful of points. But all of these players played all 6 games. 3 goals, 1 assist for Patrick Marleau. Then it would be Pavelski with 2 goals, 2 assists for 4 points. Joel Ward there at the top, 1 goal, 3 assists for 4 points. Logan Couture, 2 goals, 1 assist for 3 points. David Schlemko, 2 goals, 1 assist for 3 points. And then Brent Burns with the 0 0 goals, 3 assists for 3 points. Martin Jones, very clearly the MVP for the Sharks during this series, certainly tried his best, started all 6 games, only managed to get the 2 wins, but with a 1.75 GAA and a .935 save percentage. It is very rare that you see a goaltender with those type of stats actually lose a series, but yet, besides the 7 goals in that game 4, the Sharks only managed 7 other goals in the other 5 games, which is not nearly enough to ever really be competitive in a playoff series. So the Sharks, after what was such a great playoff run the previous season, just not being able to come nearly close enough to being able to replicate it the following season. So going into that 2017 offseason, the biggest thing, of course, was the expansion draft. The Vegas Golden Knights would be joining the NHL going into the 17-18 season, so the Sharks would have to choose which players they wanted to protect and which players they would want to leave unprotected. But that is the story for another video. Class dismissed.